Today is March 17th, 2024. My name is Melissa Ackerman, and I will be interviewing Joel Schwitzer as part of the Dallas Jewish Community Israel Mission Testimony Series. How are you today, Joel?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in. I'm going to ask you this question, and I know this is, was this your first time visiting Israel?
Somewhere around the 20th, I think.
And when was the last time you were there before this particular trip?
So Barry and Hannah and I were there just in June for AJC's annual conference, and then to spend a little personal time there together.
Mm-hmm. So what made you want to participate on this particular mission?
So as regional director for AJC, I've been very involved in advocacy for Israel and for combating the wave of anti-Semitism that we've been hit with post-October 7th, and it was important for me to put my feet on the ground and try to understand as best I could the horrors that Israel was exposed to on October 7th, to inform the advocacy efforts I do here in meeting with elected officials, religious leaders, community members. So, having worked with the community to coordinate a visit by hostage family members and to get elected officials and media and other leaders to a showing of the raw October 7th footage, I felt a special obligation to be there myself, and knew that in going, it would not only give me an opportunity to empathize and to be with Israelis, but also to inform the work I do here.
Mm-hmm. What were the most meaningful things you experienced on this trip?
There were a lot of thoughts and feelings that I was prepared to experience, and that I knew would come flooding through. For me, stepping off the bus at Kibbutz Re'im, the site of the Supernova Festival, and immediately seeing a display of pictures and other things devoted to the people that were killed and taken that day. And as someone who was a Hillel director for 10 years, seeing all of those people, any one of whom could have been one of my Hillel students, was very powerful. And I think also having an opportunity to meet with President Herzog, and when we sat down with him, the very first thing he did was not to talk about what's going on in Israel or how they're reeling from the attacks of October 7th. It was to acknowledge the increase in anti-Semitism that we've been dealing with here in the United States, and to ask us how we're doing. And it was just a reminder that we are all Klal Yisrael, we're all the people of Israel, and we care for each other, and we have to show empathy to one another.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any special experiences that were maybe not part of the trip? Did you stay longer or go earlier?
I didn't get to extend my stay, but I do want to talk about an experience I had on the plane on the way home, actually.
Please do.
So most people flew in and out of JFK. Scott Peck and I were the only people flying from Tel Aviv to Miami. And we're about an hour and a half from landing in Miami, and Scott comes up to my seat and says, "Hey, Joel, I need you to come back and talk to the person next to me." And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And so I go back, and he is sitting next to a young man who could not have been more than 16 or 17 years old. And it turned out that he was the brother of one of the hostages.
That was still being
Yes,
killed.
he was flying to Miami, where he had been invited to speak at a synagogue,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't seem to know much about his itinerary, what he was going to do apart from being at this synagogue. He looked very much like a deer in the headlights, and of course he's also still processing everything that's going on with his loved one.
Mm-hmm.
And so first of all, I was able to, while we were still in the air, through our Miami office, I was able to connect him with the Israeli consulate. So we knew no matter what happened, once he landed, he had a point of contact and someone who was there to watch out for him. But then I was struck a couple of days later, as I had gotten home and was going through my pictures, I had a photo of his brother that I had taken at one of, it must have been at the Hostages Family Forum or possibly at the site of the Supernova Festival. But I had no idea in real time when I was having the conversation with him that I would be looking at a poster of his brother just 48 hours later.
Wow. Okay. So, have you kept up with this man?
A little
young man?
bit. A little bit, and I know Scott is working to see if he can maybe bring him to Dallas before he goes back to Israel.
It's really something. What would you want people to know about what you experienced?
That making a visit to Israel right now matters. If you have the time and ability to do it, you should. It was one thing that our tour guide sent an essay that he wrote about Solidarity missions, sent it to us shortly after we got back. And in it he says, look, we live in a world where you can keep up with the news in Israel 24/7. You can go online and you can click a link and donate money to a cause. You can set up a Zoom or a FaceTime or a Skype appointment with loved ones, friends, or family that are in Israel and check in with them. But there is something about going there and saying, Hineni, here I am, that makes a tangible and real difference.
Mm-hmm. What would you like to see happen based on your experiences?
It's got to start with getting the hostages out. There is certainly a wide range of opinion within the Jewish and general communities on what should happen in terms of the next day in Gaza. But we can't even really talk about the next day until those hostages are released. And this is what's gripping the entire country right now. Everywhere you go in Israel, there is something there to amplify the plight of the hostages. You spend time at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, and you see it interpreted through art.
Mm-hmm.
You walk through the airport and you see the posters as soon as you get off the plane. Whatever comes next can't start until those families have closure, God willing, with their loved ones back at home, but closure whatever that means.
Okay. Are there any other things you'd want to talk about on here? About your trip?
I think that just like it's important for people to go to Israel right now if they can, doing whatever we can to amplify those connections between Dallas and Israel. And actually, Igor Alterman and I co-wrote an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News that on these connections between Dallas and Israel. We have just started a relationship parallel to the partnership we have with the Western Galilee. Dallas was the first community to establish a relationship with a kibbutz in the Gaza envelope for rebuilding.
And what will Dallas be doing, the community be helping with?
Dallas has committed for the next 3 years to provide funds to help with the rebuilding. And not just the physical rebuilding, but the emotional and mental rebuilding. We met with members of the Zikim community our first full night in Israel, and the woman that we spoke with is not able to get through 15 minutes of a conversation, and I'm not just talking about 15 minutes of our conversation. I'm talking about 15 minutes in her life, in her day-to-day, where she doesn't break down. Zikim is very fortunate as a community in that, unlike Kfar Aza and Be'eri, they weren't keeping their weapons in a central location, and so they didn't have the kind of loss of life or kidnapping
So
that
there were
many did.
People armed on the kibbutz
Yeah.
to be able to
In fact,
handle
I have,
things.
this is a shell casing that I was able to bring back the terrorists pulled up to the beach in speedboats and stormed the beach, they weren't able to breach the fence because people had access to their weaponry. And they thankfully the loss of life in Zakim was much lower than in some of those other communities.
So the weapons were all put away?
Yeah, and there was a protocol that Zakim opted not to follow, where the weapons are supposed to be in a central armory and only one or two people have access to them. Zakim decided that wasn't a good way to operate.
Are you glad that you made the trip when you did? Is it something that you had hesitation about?
I didn't hesitate for a moment. I'm so glad that I went. I'm glad that AJC was willing to give me not just the time but the funding to do it. I'm grateful that Igor encouraged me to go as a Jewish communal professional. There were, in addition to the Federation staff that were there and myself, there were, I think, 7 or 8 different clergy from Reform and Conservative congregations, and I think it was important that the community professionals be represented too.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about before we close this?
Yeah, back when reflecting on moments that meant a lot during our trip. When we were at the Hostage Family Forum, I think I mentioned before that just prior to our mission, I had coordinated a visit of hostage family members to Dallas. When we went in to hear the presentation by the family members of hostages, I realized that the first person we were listening to was the father of Yair and Eitan Horn. His daughter-in-law had been one of the people I had coordinated the visit for. It's not her husband who's one of the hostages, but her 2 brothers-in-law. And while she was here, Dahlia spoke with elected officials, she spoke with faith leaders, she spoke to a Latino church in Spanish. She's Argentinian, and this poor man lived in Argentina when the AMIA bombing happened 30 years ago this summer, and so he's been through and seen so much. And I was able to tell him what a phenomenal job his daughter-in-law did when she was here in Dallas, making his son's stories real, making them vibrant and relatable people that our elected officials and community leadership could get a sense of. And we both teared up a little, and you could see the sense of pride in his eyes through the tears. And that's Israel in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.